Welcome to the History Maps podcast, a city of 2 million people. The wealthiest, most cosmopolitan metropolis on the planet. I mean, the markets are just overflowing with merchants from Persia, Central Asia, dealing in silks, exotic horses.
Right, a booming economy anchored by this meticulously designed urban grid.
Exactly. And it's fueled by an agricultural surplus that, well, it seems limitless. But now, picture that same metropolis reduced to absolute ruin, practically abandoned.
Its remaining inhabitants starving or just scattered to the winds?
Yeah, the political center of the known world permanently fractured. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the An Lushan Rebellion.
A truly devastating conflict.
It tore through the Tang Dynasty from 755 to 763. And just to give you a sense of scale, if you look at the demographic collapse following this 8-year period, tens of millions of people just vanished from the imperial census.
It's staggering. We're looking at an 8th century civil war in China that fundamentally altered the trajectory of human civilization.
It dismantled a golden age. And yet, for centuries, it was largely sidelined in Western history books.
It really remains a profound historical blind spot, you know? For generations, the standard Western curriculum treated events in East Asia as, well, basically regional footnotes.
Right, while framing European events as universal history.
Exactly. We readily study the Viking raids or the crowning of Charlemagne in the late 8th century. And those are undeniably important, but they didn't result in the shattering of a unified empire that governed a massive percentage of the global population.
Yeah. The An Lushan Rebellion is not merely a chapter in Chinese history. I mean, it's a central pivot point in global economic and military history.
Completely.
So to understand the magnitude of this collapse, we have to establish exactly what was collapsing. Before 755, the Tang Dynasty is in its early 8th century prime.
Widely considered a golden age.
We're talking about an era of immense prosperity, and the engine of that prosperity was infrastructure. You have the Grand Canal.
Of an engineering marvel.
Yeah, an artificial waterway that is doing the heavy lifting of empire. It's linking the fertile, rice-producing regions of southern China directly to the political and military centers in the arid north.
And internationally, trade is just flowing along the Silk Road and through maritime routes to Southeast Asia.
Right, and the urbanization driven by this trade network was unparalleled. The western capital, Qing'an, was the cosmopolitan metropolis you described, housing over 2 million residents.
The physical footprint of that city was massive. It was defined by strict wards and 2 sprawling central markets that featured thousands of individual stalls.
You could buy essentially anything there.
Anything. And further east, you had Luoyang, the secondary capital, serving as a vital cultural and economic hub.
And to facilitate this vast commercial exchange, the Tang government utilized a highly standardized copper coinage.
Right, the Kaiyuan Tongbao.
Which provided a reliable, universally accepted currency across vast distances, which is, the lifeblood of any complex economy.
It is. But the actual foundation of this prosperity was agrarian. It rested on the equal field system, or zhengtianfa.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mechanics of the equal field system are crucial to understanding how the Tang funded itself and why everything eventually fell apart.
It's the core of the whole issue.
Right. So, as I understand it, the state essentially owned all the arable land, and they allocated it directly to the people. An adult male would receive about 100 mu of land.
Which is roughly 15 acres, for context.
15 acres. But they didn't own all of it outright. Right?
No. Roughly 80 mus belonged to the state. That portion would revert to the government upon the farmer's death. While the remaining 20 mu could be kept as inheritable private land, that was usually meant for planting mulberry trees for silk production.
So the state acts as the ultimate landlord.
Yeah, exactly. And in exchange for allocating this land, the farmers were integrated into the Zuyongdiao tax framework.
It's a tripartite obligation.
Yes. Zhu was a direct tax on the land's yield, paid in grain, typically 2 shu. Yang was a labor tax. That required the adult male to provide roughly 2 weeks of corvée labor annually for state infrastructure or military projects.
And dia was the tax paid in textiles, usually bolts of silk or hemp.
Right.
The cloth tax is fascinating to me because it functioned almost like currency, didn't it?
Precisely. Bolts of silk were standard units of exchange, especially for large state expenditures like paying foreign tribute or compensating armies.
Wow.
The brilliance of the Zhu Dao system in its early days was how it bound the peasantry directly to the central government.
It cut out the middlemen.
Exactly. It ensured a steady, predictable stream of grain, labor, and cloth to sustain the empire without having to rely on regional landlords to collect it. The government knew exactly how many households it had, how much land they were working, and exactly what they owed.
But, I mean, the math only works if you actually have enough land to give away.
That's the catch.
And when you have a long period of peace and prosperity, the population explodes. The records show the Tang population swelled to roughly 53 million people by the 8th century.
A huge demographic shift.
So if the state suddenly has no more land to give out, they can't fulfill their end of the equal field bargain. Every new generation means the plots get subdivided, or families simply go without.
The demographic pressure was the structural rot beneath the Golden Age. The state just ran out of arable land to distribute.
Right.
And simultaneously, those at the top of the social hierarchy, aristocratic families, imperial relatives, and deeply influential Buddhist monasteries, they began aggressively acquiring vast tracts of land.
Just buying it all up.
Consolidating these holdings into massive private estates known as Wangyuan. And what makes this fatal for the state's finances is that many of these massive estates were granted tax-exempt status by the imperial court.
So, you have a free peasant who can no longer get land from the government. His only option to survive is to become a tenant farmer on one of these massive private estates.
Yes.
And because he no longer holds an equal field allotment from the state, he drops off the central tax registers entirely.
Entirely. The central revenues plummeted. I mean, the people working the land were still producing grain and silk, but that wealth was flowing to the regional aristocrats and the monasteries, not the imperial treasury.
Meanwhile, the state's expenses were only growing.
Right, and the tax burden on the remaining independent freeholders became crushing. That forced even more of them to abandon their land and seek refuge on the tax-exempt estates. The entire financial model of the empire was hollowing out from the inside.
Which means the state has a major problem paying for its military.
A massive problem.
Early on, the Tang relied on the Fubing militia. This was a peasant soldier framework of roughly 600,000 troops.
A part-time force.
Yeah. A farmer would work his equal field allotment during peacetime and rotate into military service when the state needed him. But if the equal field system is collapsing, and the state can't collect its tax or demand corvée labor, they can't sustain a militia of that size.
The fuping system was highly cost-effective, but it relied completely on the state providing the farmer with land to sustain his family while he fought.
Right, which they couldn't do anymore.
Furthermore, it was a system designed for short-term campaigns and internal policing. As the Tang borders expanded aggressively into Central Asia to manage mounting threats from Turkic, Tibetan, and Khitan forces, sending part-time farmers to the harsh frontier for years at a time became strategically and economically impossible.
You need full-time soldiers for that.
Yes. The state required permanent garrisons. Therefore, the military structure had to shift to a standing army of long-service professional frontier troops, known as Qingzhenbing.
And to command these massive professional frontier armies, the court creates the position of Jidushi, or military governor.
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this shift in power.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like a modern corporation realizing that managing security across all their international branches is just too expensive to do from headquarters. So the CEO hires private military contractors and tells them to handle it. And headquarters just assumes they will all stay loyal.
Take that corporate analogy a step further. Imagine those security contractors are not just handed weapons. They're also granted the legal authority to collect their own local revenue from your branch offices to fund themselves.
Wow, so they don't even need corporate for funding.
No, they control their own budgets. They appoint their own subordinate officers. They command highly trained, battle-hardened professionals who have zero connection to the CEO back in the capital. The central government essentially surrendered the entirety of its military apparatus to the periphery to secure the borders.
So the people with the actual swords no longer need the central government for their paychecks.
Precisely. By the mid-8th century, you had hundreds of thousands of elite professional troops stationed on the empire's borders, answering only to their regional judici.
While the central government in Qingyan is what? Completely drained of its tax base?
Utterly drained. Left with a token force of roughly 84,000 largely undertrained, inexperienced guardsmen for its own defense.
That's nothing compared to the frontier.
They built a defensive shell so hard that it drained the center of all its strength. It was a structural powder keg.
And the man who realized he was holding a match near that powder keg was An Lushan.
Yes.
His rise to power is a fascinating case study in how the Tang frontier operated. He was born in 703 in a town called Lusheng in modern Liaoning.
Right.
And he was not Han Chinese. He was of mixed, non-Han descent, which the Tang referred to as Zahu. His mother was Turkic, and his father was Sogdian, bearing the family name Kang. His original name was reportedly Yan Lushan or An Lushan.
He grows up in the borderlands, surrounded by this massive collision of cultures.
Yeah, what was that frontier environment actually like?
Well, a frontier market in the Tang Dynasty was a nexus of intelligence, commerce, and military friction. You had nomadic tribes bringing horses and furs, Sogdian merchants moving goods from the west, and Tang officials trying to manage it all.
A real melting pot.
Absolutely. Being of Sogdian and Turkic descent meant An Lushan navigated this complex multi-ethnic reality with total fluency. He spoke multiple languages, which allowed him to start his career as a border broker, essentially translating, negotiating, and trading between the Tang military and the various nomadic tribes.
And that role gives him a deep understanding of nomadic military tactics, tribal politics, and Tang bureaucracy.
It was the perfect training ground.
He gets noticed by Zhang Shubi, a prominent Tang military commissioner, who brings him into formal military service. And An Lushan proves to be incredibly effective in the field, scoring major victories against the Xi and Khitan tribes on the northeastern frontier.
His ascent through the military bureaucracy was meteoric. The Tang court deeply valued results on the frontier, and An Lushan delivered.
You really do.
By 742, he is named Jidushi of the Pinglu Command. Just 2 years later, in 744, he adds the Fanyang Command. By 751, he is also granted control of Hedong.
That's 3 major commands.
Through a combination of battlefield success and sheer political maneuvering, one man effectively gained control over 3 of the most vital northeastern military commands simultaneously.
The concentration of power there is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at a personal, deeply loyal, highly diverse professional army of over 150,000 to 180,000 troops under his direct command.
A massive force.
And this isn't just happening in a vacuum. He is cultivating intense favor at the imperial court, specifically with Emperor Xuanzong.
Emperor Xuanzong is a complex figure. I mean, he had reigned for decades, presiding over the absolute peak of the Tang Golden Age.
Right.
But in his later years, he became increasingly detached from the tedious daily realities of statecraft. He began heavily delegating power to chancellors and focused his attention on the arts, Taoism, and the luxuries of the court.
So when An Lushan visits Chang, he plays the court politics brilliantly.
Oh, masterfully. He portrayed himself as a loyal, somewhat buffoonish, uncultured frontier barbarian. He would play the fool, which entirely disarmed the sophisticated courtiers and the emperor.
He leaned into the stereotype.
He did. He was so favored that he was formally adopted as a foster son by the emperor's most beloved and powerful concubine, Yan Guifei.
That adoption essentially makes him politically untouchable for a time. He has the ultimate shield. But the political landscape in Chang'an is notoriously volatile, isn't it?
Very volatile.
For years, a powerful chancellor named Li Linfu had actually patronized An Lushan. Li Linfu was a master of keeping the various court factions balanced and checking the power of the generals. But Li Linfu dies in 752.
A major turning point.
He's replaced by Yang Gusong, who happens to be a relative of the high concubine Yan Guifei. And Yang Gusong and An Lushan develop an immediate visceral hatred for one another.
Yes, Yan Gusong was a deeply ambitious politician who recognized the existential threat An Lushan posed. I mean, he looked at the map and saw a single military governor controlling an army twice the size of the empire's central defenses.
Which is terrifying if you're the chancellor.
Exactly. Yang Gusong repeatedly pressured Emperor Xuanzong to summon An Lushan to the capital. He was essentially trying to trap him, strip him of his command, or have him executed for treason.
And An Lushan knows this.
Right. Receiving reports of this hostility, he realized that returning to Chang'an might mean a death sentence.
Wait, let me push back on this a bit. Looking at the historical records, traditional Chinese historiography leans heavily into this court drama. They blame Emperor Xuanzong for being distracted by his infatuation with Yan Guifei, and they blame this deeply personal rivalry between An Lushan and Yan Gusong as the trigger for the entire war. Are you telling me this massive, catastrophic conflict was just a math problem, a structural inevitability, and the court drama didn't actually matter?
You have identified the core historiographical debate right there. The traditional narrative, which was heavily moralized by later Confucian historians, prefers to frame the rebellion as the tragic consequence of an emperor losing his moral mandate.
Right, a story of corruption.
They want the story to be about the corrupting influence of court factions and unchecked personal ambition. However, modern structural analysis suggests that the court drama merely dictated the timeline, not the inevitability of the conflict.
Interesting.
When a state hollows out its own fiscal base, delegates the entirety of its military power to regional warlords, and fails to maintain a central army capable of enforcing its will, it creates a systemic vulnerability that will eventually be exploited.
So someone was going to rebel eventually.
Yes. And Lushan did not need Yang Gusong's enmity to rebel. He already possessed the means and the opportunity. The tension at court simply provided the catalyst.
And that catalyst ignites in the winter of 755. On December 16, An Lushan mobilizes his massive force. 150,000 battle-hardened veterans march south from their stronghold in Fenyang.
A massive mobilization.
But he doesn't immediately declare himself an enemy of the Tang state, does he?
No. He utilizes a classic political pretext. He claims he is launching a righteous military campaign to march on the capital and eliminate the treacherous Yang Gozong to save the emperor from corrupt advisors.
Which provides a veneer of legitimacy.
It did, but the sheer speed and logistics of his advance shattered any illusion of a limited political maneuver. Moving an army of 150,000 men, heavily reliant on elite cavalry, requires immense planning, supply lines, and coordination.
You don't just do that on a whim.
Exactly. When An Lushan's forces crossed the Yellow River, they encountered almost no meaningful resistance. The local garrisons in the Central Plains were entirely unprepared.
Because they were just local militias, right?
Yes. They relied on local militias who had never seen combat, much less faced a professional frontier army. These local forces either surrendered immediately, melting into the countryside, or were annihilated.
And the Tang court in Chang'an is completely caught off guard. I mean, they are in absolute panic mode.
Total panic.
In a desperate attempt to slow the advance, the court authorizes a censor named Feng Chengqing to rapidly assemble levies in the eastern capital of Luoyang. They scrape together roughly 60,000 men to mount a defense.
And we must emphasize the composition of these levies. These were not soldiers. They were urban residents, merchants, artisans, and farmers who were abruptly handed weapons and ordered into formation against heavily armored veteran cavalry.
A complete mismatch.
The tactical mismatch was absolute. Feng Changqing was a capable administrator, but he was dealt an impossible hand.
The outcome is brutal. The levies are systematically crushed. Luoyang, the magnificent eastern capital, capitulates just 33 days after An Lushan began his march.
33 days.
That speed is terrifying. To move an army that massive across that kind of distance, cross a major river, and capture one of the greatest cities in the world in a month shows the sheer mechanical superiority of the frontier forces over the central government.
The fall of Luoyang finalized the political rupture. Having seized the secondary capital and its resources, An Lushan abandoned the pretext of being a loyal subject, purging corrupt advisors.
He drops the act.
He does. Shortly after taking the city, he formally declared himself the emperor of a new dynasty, the Yan Dynasty, establishing Luoyang as his capital. The Tang court finally realized they were not dealing with a mutiny, they were fighting a total war for the survival of the empire.
Following the loss of Luoyang, the Tang forces pull back to establish a defense at the Tungwan Pass. Let's look at the geography here because it dictates the entire strategy. Tungwan is a highly defensible, narrow choke point nestled between mountains and the Yellow River.
A perfect natural fortress.
It is the primary geographical gateway guarding the western approach to Cheng'an. The Tang placed General Ge Han, a seasoned veteran, in command of roughly 200,000 troops there. And this creates a temporary solid wall against the Yan advance.
The geography of Tungwan Pass neutralized An Lushan's greatest asset, his cavalry. In a narrow, heavily fortified defile, shot cavalry cannot maneuver or utilize their speed. They are forced into a grinding frontal assault against entrenched infantry, which is tactical suicide.
So Ge Han knew exactly what he was doing.
Ge Han understood this perfectly. His strategy was textbook attritional defense. Hold the impenetrable pass, deny the Yan forces the ability to forage, bleed their supply lines, and wait for imperial reinforcements from the southern and western provinces to mobilize and eventually outflank the rebels.
So they have a veteran general executing a flawless defensive strategy, holding a fortress that cannot be breached. But back in Chang'an, the politicians are looking at this stalemate and getting anxious.
They get impatient.
Yang Guzong and the court eunuchs begin whispering in the emperor's ear. They accuse Geshe Han of cowardice. They argue that maintaining this massive army at the pass is draining the treasury, and they pressure Emperor Xuanzong to order an immediate, all-out offensive to crush the rebellion quickly.
It stands as one of the most catastrophic political interferences in military history.
Here's where it gets really interesting in terms of tactical blunders. Compare it to abandoning an impenetrable fortress to fight a superior cavalry force in an open field simply because politicians back home were getting impatient.
That is exactly what happened. The civilians in the capital, entirely detached from the tactical reality on the ground, demanded a swift public relations victory. Under immense political pressure and direct, inescapable imperial orders, Geshe Han was forced to abandon his fortifications.
He had to march out.
He marched an army of 200,000 men out of the safety of the Tongguan Pass and into the open field.
And once they're out in the open plains, An Lushan's veteran cavalry has the space to maneuver. The Tang army is outflanked, overwhelmed, and annihilated. The defensive wall is gone, and the road to Chang'an is completely undefended.
When news of the annihilation at Tongguan Pass reached Chang, the administration disintegrated. On June 14, 756, Emperor Xuanzong, Chancellor Yang Guzong, the high concubine Yang Gufei, and a small entourage of imperial guards fled the capital.
Just left the city behind.
They headed west, aiming for the treacherous, highly defensible mountain paths of Sichuan, leaving the population of Chang'an to its fate.
This flight leads to the mutiny at Maowei Station, which is one of the most emotionally charged events in this entire history. The imperial party stops to rest. The imperial guards who are escorting them are exhausted, starving, and terrified.
And resentful.
Yeah, they know they have left their families behind to die in the capital. And they know exactly who to blame for the disastrous policies that destroyed the empire's defenses. The resentment boils over into open mutiny.
The guards executed Chancellor Yang Guzong, but the violence did not stop with him. The mutineers demanded the death of Yang Gufei as well.
The high concubine.
Their logic was stark. The Yang family's influence over the court was the root cause of the political rot and the military blunders. They refused to march another step, effectively taking the emperor hostage until she was eliminated.
Try to comprehend the psychological state of Emperor Xuanzong in this moment. This is a man who has ruled a global superpower for over 40 years. He presided over an era of unprecedented art, wealth, and stability.
A true emperor.
Now he is huddled at a rural relay station, utterly stripped of his power, surrounded by his own blood-soaked bodyguards. And to appease them, to literally save his own life, he is forced to order the strangulation of the woman he loves.
It is the definitive collapse of his authority, both politically and personally. The emperor survived the mutiny, but his spirit was broken. Shortly after reaching safety, he abdicated the throne, passing the fractured remains of the empire to his son, who became Emperor Suzong.
While the Yan forces are just pouring through.
Right. Meanwhile, the Yan forces poured through the undefended passes and occupied Chang'an. The western capital fell. The rebels looted the city, burning its markets and executing thousands of Tang officials and their families who had been unable to escape.
By the summer of 756, the Yan Dynasty seems invincible. They control both capitals, the Tang emperor is in exile, and the central armies are shattered. But the geography of China is vast, and the sheer scale of the logistical challenge begins to bog down the Yan advance.
It slows them down significantly.
The initial lightning-fast campaign transitions into a grueling, horrific, attritional stalemate.
And while the Yan armies are entrenched in the field, a severe leadership crisis was forming at the very top. An Lushan remained in the eastern capital of Luoyang, but his physical and mental health was rapidly deteriorating.
He wasn't doing well.
He became morbidly obese, suffering from severe chronic health issues, including recurrent carbuncles. Most critically, he went completely blind.
And with the blindness comes a profound, violent paranoia. He can't see who is in the room with him. He begins lashing out, executing his own advisors, his closest generals, and palace servants on the absolute flimsiest of suspicions. No one is safe.
His erratic cruelty alienated his inner circle, including his own family. An Lushan heavily favored a younger son born to a concubine, openly considering naming him heir.
Which is a huge threat to his eldest son.
Yes. This deeply threatened his eldest son and presumptive heir, An Qingsu. Realizing his own father might execute him at any moment, An Lushan orchestrated a conspiracy with a eunuch named Yan and a trusted Sogdian bodyguard named Li Zuir.
A tight conspiracy.
In early 757, while An Lushan lay incapacitated, Li Zuir entered his bedchamber and assassinated him. An Lushan immediately seized power and proclaimed himself the new Yan emperor.
It is a dark, claustrophobic end for the architect of the rebellion. But the armies in the field are still fighting, and this brings us to one of the most horrifying chapters of the war, the siege of Suyang.
A truly grim standoff.
This standoff lasts for 10 agonizing months. You have two Tang loyalist generals, Zhang Sun and Shu Yuan, holding this fortified city with a tiny force of roughly 7,000 men, and they are completely surrounded by a Yan army of 130,000 troops commanded by General Yanziki.
To understand why Zhang Sun fought so desperately, you have to understand the strategic geography of Suyang.
Right.
The city sat astride the canal network that guarded the approach to the Wai River region. The Wai River Basin was the agricultural heartland of the south, untouched by the war, overflowing with grain and wealth.
So if the city falls.
If Suyang fell quickly, the massive Yan armies would pour into the south, seize those resources, solve their logistical problems, and possess the economic power to permanently crush the Tang Dynasty. Zhang Sun knew that Suyang was the plug in the dam. He had to hold the city at all costs to deny the Yan forces that grain.
And they hold out for 10 months against overwhelming odds. The mechanics of this siege are brutal. Constant assaults, tunneling under the walls, relentless psychological warfare. But it is what happens when the food finally runs out that defines this siege.
Yeah.
When the grain stores are empty, the defenders eat the horses. Then they eat the bark off the trees, the leather from their armor, paper, dirt. And when even that is gone, starvation sets in, and the commanders make a terrifying choice. To keep the soldiers alive and fighting, they resort to organized cannibalism.
The historical records regarding Suyang force us to confront the absolute limits of human endurance and the grim reality of total war. To sustain the garrison, the military command authorized the consumption of the city's non-combatant population.
It's just horrifying to think about.
They began with the women, children, and the elderly. Records indicate that over 2,000 civilians were consumed to provide the caloric energy necessary for the soldiers to continue manning the walls.
This presents a staggering moral question. I want you to consider the moral calculus of war in that environment. Does military history view a general like Zhang Sun as a hero, a man whose brutal, unflinching pragmatism tied down a massive enemy army and literally saved an empire from total destruction? Or is he a monster who crossed an unforgivable human boundary, slaughtering the very civilians he was commissioned by the state to protect?
It is a profound ethical dilemma that has sparked fierce debate among historians for centuries. Traditional Confucian scholars often praise Zhang Sun's actions as the ultimate expression of loyalty to the state, arguing that the survival of the dynasty superseded the lives of the city's inhabitants.
And modern historians.
Modern structural analysis, however, views the siege as a demonstration of the dehumanizing logic of attritional warfare, where strategic necessity overrides basic human morality. Impartially speaking, by tying down 130,000 Yan troops for nearly a year, Zhang Sun entirely disrupted their logistics and prevented the southern grain from falling into rebel hands.
So it worked.
His brutal defense was a strategic necessity for the Tang, but it exacted an unimaginable human toll. When Suyang finally fell on January 23, 758, the Yan forces entered a city containing only 400 emaciated survivors.
While Suyang was buying time with civilian blood, the new Tang Emperor Suzong was making desperate diplomatic moves to secure external military alliances. He knows the Tang military is depleted, so he reaches out to the Uyghur Khaganate, led by Bayan Shir Khan.
A crucial alliance.
The Tang court essentially trades marriage alliances, massive amounts of silk and tribute, and the promise of loot in exchange for military intervention.
That alliance fundamentally altered the tactical balance of the war. The Tang secured a contingent of elite Uyghur cavalry, numbering between 4,000 and 10,000 men.
Which doesn't sound like a lot compared to armies of 100,000.
While that might seem like a small fraction compared to the massive infantry formations involved in the rebellion, in 8th century warfare, highly disciplined, heavily armored nomadic cavalry acted as an overwhelming shock force. They provided the Tang armies with the rapid mobility and flanking power they had desperately lacked.
And the impact is immediate. Tang General Guo Zi, supported by this Uyghur heavy cavalry, meets a massive Yan army at the Battle of Jiangji Temple on November 13, 757.
A massive battle.
The cavalry shatters the rebel flanks. It is a decisive, crushing victory for the Tang. They kill 30,000 Yan troops and break the rebel army. The very next day, Tang forces march into the ruins of Chang'an, retaking the western capital. Within months, they push east and retake Luoyang as well.
Reclaiming the dual capitals was a huge psychological victory, signaling to the empire that the Tang Dynasty still held the mandate of heaven. The Yan forces, battered but not destroyed, retreated to their northern strongholds in the Hebei region.
So they're cornered.
However, the true threat to the Yan Dynasty was no longer the Tang armies. It was their own internal structure. The assassination of An Lushan had set a lethal precedent. The rebel command was not bound by bureaucratic institutions or a unifying political ideology. It was a fragile coalition built entirely on personal ambition and warlordism.
Which opens the door for a general named Shi Siming. He was an old, powerful ally of An Lushan, commanding tens of thousands of elite troops on the northern frontier. He watches An Lushan's son, An Qingsu, struggling to hold the rebel coalition together.
He sees weakness.
In the spring of 759, Shi Siming intercepts a massive Tang offensive and scores a brilliant tactical victory. Emboldened, he realizes he has the strongest army on the board. He refuses to take orders from An Qingsu anymore. He captures him, executes him on April 10, 759, and declares himself the new Yan emperor.
Shi Siming was a far more capable military mind than An Qingsu. His usurpation temporarily halted the internal hemorrhaging of the Yan state.
He stabilizes things for a bit.
He reorganized the armies and, utilizing the rapid cavalry tactics he had perfected on the frontier, launched a fierce counteroffensive, successfully recapturing the eastern capital of Luoyang in the autumn of 759.
So the pendulum swings back.
The conflict devolved into a bitter, grinding stalemate along the major river systems. The Tang had fortified their defensive lines and integrated their Uyghur allies, while Shi Siming lacked the overarching manpower to mount a deeper western push toward Chang'an.
But then, the structural flaw of the rebellion rears its head again. History repeats itself in the darkest way possible. Just like An Lushan, Shi Siming begins to alienate his inner circle. And on April 18, 761, Shi Siming is assassinated by his own son, Shi Chaoi.
It is a complete cycle of patricide.
The architect of the rebellion was murdered by his son, and the man who took over the rebellion was murdered by his son.
And it was the fatal blow to the Yan Dynasty. Shi Chaoi possessed neither the charismatic authority of An Lushan nor the proven military brilliance of his father, Shi Siming. When he murdered his father, the remaining Yan generals, hardened warlords commanding massive personal armies, realized there was no stability, legitimacy, or profit left in the rebel cause.
So what does this all mean? Look at the deep irony here. The entire An Lushan Rebellion was sparked 8 years prior because of a supposed lack of trust. The chancellor didn't trust the general didn't trust the emperor. Yet the Yan Dynasty ultimately defeats itself because its leaders literally could not trust their own sons not to assassinate them in their sleep.
It perfectly illustrates why warlordism fails without a cohesive ideological or administrative framework. Power relied solely on violence and personal authority. Once that authority was compromised from within by familial betrayal, the entire command structure inevitably collapsed. Recognizing this paralysis, Tang forces, once again bolstered by their Uyghur cavalry, launched a massive final offensive. They swept through the fractured Yan defenses and pushed them out of Luoyang for the final time.
The rebel coalition shatters. Mass defections occur across the board. The very generals who once fought for Shi Chaoi realize the war is lost and surrender to the Tang to preserve their own wealth and power.
Just looking out for themselves.
Shi Chaoi is chased north into Hebei. Cornered, abandoned by his troops, he is forced to commit suicide by his own defecting officers on February 17, 763. With his death, the Yan Dynasty is formally extinguished and the active fighting finally stops.
The fighting stopped, but the empire that emerged from the ashes was unrecognizable. The Tang Dynasty had technically survived the military challenge, but it had secured a Pyrrhic victory. The immediate, most glaring, and heavily debated legacy of the conflict was the staggering demographic collapse.
The numbers are difficult to process. If you look at the Tang census records, they show the registered population dropping from 53 million people right before the rebellion down to just 17 million in 764, a year after it ended.
That is 36 million people missing from the rolls.
Many historians and commentators have cited this figure to attribute up to 36 million deaths to this war, which would equal roughly 1/6 of the entire global population at the time.
We have to analyze those numbers carefully to understand the true nature of the devastation. While the death toll from direct military combat, the resulting sieges, the starvation, and the rampant spread of disease was undoubtedly catastrophic, likely in the tens of millions, the drop of 36 million in the census does not equate to 36 million corpses.
Right, because if the government can't count you, you technically don't exist on paper.
Exactly. What we are seeing is the utter collapse of the state's administrative capacity. Millions of peasants, desperate to escape the mechanized slaughter in the northern plains, migrated southward into the dense, river-laced topography of the Yangtze Valley.
So they just moved.
They migrated into regions where the weakened Tang bureaucracy could no longer effectively register or tax them. Furthermore, countless families voluntarily attached themselves to the tax-exempt private estates of local warlords to survive, intentionally dropping off the imperial radar.
Even factoring in that administrative nuance to help anchor this, if even 15 or 20 million people died, you were talking about the equivalent of multiple modern-day European nations completely vanishing from the map in the span of 8 years.
The human tragedy is absolute.
But the political map was also permanently scarred. The Tang court simply did not have the military strength or the resources to fully conquer the remaining rebel generals in the northeast.
Right. To secure a pragmatic peace and end the bloodshed, the Tang court was forced to grant amnesty and practical autonomy to several powerful surrendered Yan generals,
Creating a fractured state.
This resulted in the creation of what historians call the three garrisons of Hebei. These circuits operated as essentially independent military fiefdoms within the empire's borders. The local military governors kept their own taxes, maintained their own massive private armies, and passed their governorships down hereditarily to their sons without seeking central approval.
So the emperor is basically powerless there.
The Tang emperor became a mere figurehead in these regions, signaling the permanent fragmentation of centralized imperial authority.
And because the equal field system we talked about earlier was utterly destroyed and the government lost control of the north, they had to figure out a completely new way to survive financially. They needed money.
Desperately.
So in 779, a chancellor introduces the two-tax system. Instead of the old system where they taxed individuals based on a theoretical allocation of state land, they start taxing actual land ownership. They collect taxes twice a year based on the size and value of the land a person actually owns.
The two-tax system was a monumental paradigm shift in Chinese administrative history. It was the state officially acknowledging that private land ownership and massive aristocratic estates were the permanent new reality.
They gave up on the old ideal.
Exactly. It abandoned the centuries-old centralized ideal of state-owned, equally distributed land. By shifting from a head tax to a wealth and property tax, the government modernized its fiscal approach to survive its diminished authority.
It is essentially the birth of modern real estate and property taxes in China. And this administrative shift, combined with the mass migration of millions of refugees escaping the ruined north, permanently shifts the economic heart of China.
A huge geographical pivot.
The center of gravity moves from the traditional northern Yellow River Valley downward to the southern Yangtze River Valley, laying the geographical and economic foundation for the China we know today.
The Tang Dynasty limped on for another century and a half, heavily reliant on the wealth of the South and the military protection of foreign alliances, before finally collapsing in 907.
But its culture permanently shifted.
It did. The confident, expansive, cosmopolitan empire of the Silk Road was replaced by an inward-looking defensive conservatism. Chang'an, once the great global city of 2 million, was left in ruins and never again regained its geopolitical supremacy. The An Lushan Rebellion destroyed the old aristocracy, decentralized military power, and established a precedent of regional warlordism that would plague the empire until its final dissolution.
To recap this massive journey, we started at the absolute peak of the Tang Golden Age, a time of unprecedented global trade and urban prosperity fueled by the equal field system. We examined how the state's inability to manage its land and its decision to outsource military power to the frontiers created a structural vulnerability.
Right.
We followed the rapid rise of An Lushan, a multi-ethnic border broker who exploited that vulnerability, setting off a horrific 8-year conflict. We traced the grinding realities of attritional warfare, the moral abyss of the siege of Suyang, the desperate alliances with nomadic cavalry, and the cycle of patricide that ultimately consumed the rebel dynasty, leaving the Tang Empire permanently fractured.
It serves as a profound historical study of systemic failure. It demonstrates how rapidly a complex, prosperous society can unravel when its structural economic flaws are exposed by unchecked military power. The legacy of those 8 years define the parameters of Chinese statecraft for the next millennium.
So we leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over. We often view the An Lushan Rebellion purely as a tragedy, the bloody, catastrophic end of a cosmopolitan golden age. But what if we shift our perspective? What if the destruction of the old rigid aristocracy and the forced implementation of the land-based two-tax system were actually the violent, necessary birth pangs of the modern Chinese economic state? The rebellion shattered the ancient state-controlled economic mold, forcing a modernization of bureaucracy and land management that ultimately paved the way for the massive commercial and technological revolution of the later Tang Dynasty. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.